Mingulay lies on the southern tip of the Outer Hebrides island chain and is a mini expedition high on the list of any serious UK sea kayaker. The expedition offers stunning scenery and super camp spots. The sheer exposure and scenery on the west side of Mingulay and Barra Head is equal to anything in the UK, with spectacular cliffs, chasms, caves and arches. Although the distances are not that great, isolation and exposure levels are extremely high, and this trip can only be considered with settled wind and swell conditions. Communications are virtually non-existent out there, so updated weather forecasts can't be obtained. Landing spots are infrequent and tidal flows between the islands and around the headlands are significant, so careful tidal planning is also essential. This video is a story of our trip out there in 2021. The plan was to set off from Vatersay, paddle south along the east side of the island chain of Sandray and Pabe and on to Mingulay. From there we hoped to circumnavigate Barra Head and Mingulay if conditions were suitable. Then we would return via the west side of these islands and up the west side of Vatersay before returning to our launch spot about a week later. So we waited for suitable wind and swell forecasts and got 8 days' gear and provisions together. We set off in Jeff's camper van for an overnight stop near Oban, with Mike and Jeff sleeping in the van and me in the bivvy bag. I avoided the snoring but had the midges to contend with. The next day we were on the ferry out of Oban, heading to Castle Bay on Barra, a 5-hour crossing. Then a short drive to the stunning east beach of Vatersay, where we had pre-arranged to leave the van. This is the best shot of the holiday. This is other people carrying my boat. I love this. Keep up the good work, lads. We soon sorted out the boats and gear and set off early evening. Heading down the east side of Vatersay, across the sound of Sandray, about 1 kilometre. Round the southeast point of Sandray, we headed for our planned camp spot. As it was late, we camped on the beach to save carrying the gear up to the dunes. Day 2. The plan was to head over to Pabe and then on to Mingulay. The weather seems suitably calm, as forecast. so after breakfast we were soon packed up and ready to go. We paddled round the southeast point of Sandray and headed across the Sound of Pabby, about 4 kilometres. Tides of 3 to 4 knots run through the sound. Although swell and wind conditions were light, we encountered some challenging water conditions in the sound, though I failed to capture this on camera. We then paddled down the east side of Pabby. Round Rossinis Point to the only landing spot on the island, a superb, fairly sheltered beach on the southeast side where we stopped for a snack. Though attempting to explore here, we decided to push on and cross the Sound of Mingulay before the tide of 3 to 4 knots started running. That's Mingulay and Barra Head and the Heskia Skerries off to the right. The crossing of Mingulay Sound, about 3 kilometres, was fairly straightforward, and soon the only landing spot on Mingulay came into view, a beautiful white sand beach. Although on the sheltered east side, this beach is known to pick up swell from all directions, but as forecast, swell conditions were low, so we had a simple landing. After some discussion, we opted to set up camp on the beach again, as the suitable grassy spots are a bit of a carry up a steep bank. As is so often the case in such places, the ubiquitous oyster catcher greeted us. It felt really good to have arrived at this stunning place. Part 1 of the trip objectives had been met. After a snack, we explored some of the island and the village ruins. The village once had a community of around 160 people, but was abandoned in 1912 after many years of struggle for survival, and like all the islands, it is now uninhabited. The remains of the manse with a fine view of the bay and village from its elevated position. After food and a few glasses of whiskey, the plan for the following day was discussed. Day 3. From the shelter of the bay, the weather conditions looked good for the planned circumnavigation of Barra Head and the west side of Mingulay. This was really what we had come for. Not a big distance, about 20k, but with no landing spots, full-on exposure, no hiding places, and uncertain sea conditions once we got round to the west side. This day's paddle demanded full respect, and I for one was very excited. Unfortunately, Mike was nursing a shoulder injury and decided it was unwise for him to do the trip. He opted for a day exploring Mingulay on foot, so it was just the two of us that set off into the Sound of Vatersay. We very briefly touched down on the north side of Vatersay at the old jetty. We would have loved to stop and explore here, but felt time did not allow. So we headed off clockwise round the east point between Vatersay and Skerries. We had anticipated some tidal flow and water movement near this point, and also in the Sound, but all was reassuringly calm. Heading along the south side of Vatersay, the sheer grandeur and exposure of this place started to unfold before us. The lighthouse was just visible in the mist at the top of the cliffs as we approached Barra Head. Nearly at the western point of Barra Head. I'd heard this place described as being like paddling round the edge of the world, and I certainly got that feeling. With cliffs of nearly 200 metres rising above us, and the seabed here 100 metres deep. The nearest land facing west is Canada, and this is about as far out there as you can get in a sea kayak. Fortunately, our wind and swell forecast was correct. Conditions were as good as we could hope for. This place would be very inhospitable in anything other than very good conditions. As we rounded Skate Point, the west side of Mingulay came into view, and what a view it was. We crossed back over the Sound of Sandray to the Gearum Skerries. From these skerries we had to cross the gap, dodging the huge rogue wave set behind us and onto the southwest side of Mingulay. Then on past the point of Mingulay. Again, the view that opened up before us was awe-inspiring. We were on total sensory overload. That's the huge animal stack up ahead. We headed down the south side of it looking for Gwenamal stack and its natural arch, which we found and headed through. A very impressive arch formed by the erosion of the 100-metre high basalt dike. Once again we pondered what this place would be like in less than ideal sea conditions. We headed back out and up the truly impressive chasm between Animal and Mingulay. Progress was slow here. We were paddling hard, fighting against the tidal flow running through the chasm. On through Beol na Craig with the impressive cliffs at nearly 200 meters high above us. Then came the highlight of the trip for me, the Animal Chasm, a 300-meter long, 100-meter high chasm between Mingulay and the Animal Stack. Again, this is not a place to consider going in less than ideal conditions, but today it looked fine. With ongoing sensory overload, we paddled on into it. On reaching the tunnel that runs through the middle of the stack, we considered heading through, but were wary that one of the occasional rogue sets we had seen previously could come through, which would have been very serious. Caution prevailed on this occasion, so we continued on through to the end of the chasm. Onward past the northwestern point of Vatersay Moor, with sea conditions getting a bit more lively round the point. We took a wide line across Sleateader Bay to admire the scenery from a bit further out. Then on round the northern point, Gillichan and the Red Buoy Sea Stack. And finally to the northeast point. Conditions round the Solomore and Solombieg skerries looked a bit lively, but we spotted a possible gap between Solomore and Mingulay, which looked navigable and calm. It was, and soon we popped through onto the sheltered east side of Mingulay. Shortly we were back to our camp at Mingulay Beach. It seems the day's activities had taken their toll on one member of the group. Others went exploring the village ruins again. Day 4. From the shelter of the camp the conditions looked good. There was a temptation to stay another day and go and fully explore Sandray and Barra Head, but without an updated weather forecast and with Mike's shoulder of uncertain durability, we decided the sensible thing to do was to start heading back. Having accomplished what we set out to do, it didn't seem wise to hang around too long and risk getting stuck. So we set off in idyllic conditions, heading north up the east side of Mingulay. Through the Solomore Gap, and out into the sound of Mingulay, heading towards the west side of Pabay. In the sound of Mingulay, with the impressive Heskia Skerries to the west and Pabay to the east. One final look back towards Mingulay. Onwards past Pabay towards Lingay. Then onto the west side of Flodday, where we were looking for a small gap and a natural arch. found the gap, but not the arch. Perhaps the arch marked on the OS map had collapsed. Once through the gap, we headed towards the northwest side of Sandray. Onto our planned camp spot on Sandray. And what a super camp spot it was. We were now back to within a relatively short paddle from our start point, and as such part one of our trip to Mingulay and Barra Head was successfully completed. We were certainly not left disappointed, and to be honest, I was still processing the amazing experience. In the evening, a walk up to the summit of Sandray let us look back towards where we started and out towards Mingulay and the route we had paddled. The midges had decided to visit the camp area, but the beach was clear for a while. However, after food they found us, so it was on with the midge net. Later they followed the others back up to the tents, leaving me in peace for my final whiskey, taking in the view in the setting sun. Our plan for the next few days was to head up the west side of Vatersay and on to Barra, again a remote and spectacular coastline. We weren't sure what the weather forecast was, but we were now slightly less exposed and out there, and as such had more options available if the weather did turn for the worse, or if Mike's improving shoulder was to get worse again. You can check out part 2 of this trip on the next video.